It's time for another Dirt Daily, and today we are again working on the giveaway Gladiator. This is the brand new Jeep Gladiator that Cal 4 Wheel is raffling off. Cal 4 Wheel fights to keep all the trails open in California, and every year they raffle off a Jeep. This year they asked me if I would put the Jeep together, so I've been working on this now and then to try and get it ready for one of you to win. All you have to do is go to the Cal 4 Wheel website and buy a raffle ticket, and one of you will win this thing next year. I think it's January or February next year they're going to draw the winner. So we've already done a few things. It's got a winch bumper, it's got rock sliders, it's got a rear bumper, it's got some like cargo boxes in the bed. But one of the problems that I have with Gladiators is that they're so long looking when they're on stock tires. They kind of like look like one of those wiener dogs that are like super short and long. And I like Gladiators, I really like them, but for some reason they just seem to be super low when they're in stock form. So we're gonna fix that today. We're going in the shop. This thing's gonna end up on bigger tires by the end of this episode. Let's get to work. Jeez, this thing's so long it doesn't even fit on the screen. This Gladiator came with two 55/75 R17 BFG mud tires. They are a cool tire, they're just not very big. And you might get a little bit bigger if you got the Rubicon version, but honestly, I think that this is a great tire, it just is kind of too small for the Jeep because it's so long. We are gonna upgrade. We're gonna keep the BFG brand, but instead of these little 31s, we're gonna step up to 37/12/50 17s on some bronze Raceline wheels. Now the bronze look has been around for a bit. Some people might think it has jumped the shark. I think it looks really good, especially with the red paint on the Gladiator. But in order to get these to fit under it, we're gonna have to do some suspension modifications. We have a whole lift kit from Fabtech that's gonna go on here. So by the end of this project, the Jeep will be taller, have a better breakover angle, have better approach and departure angles. Basically, it will work better off-road and it will look way cooler. Come on, little wiener dog, let's get you up on the lift. I started by blasting all the lug nuts off and removing the tires, and I figured out really quickly that the factory lug nuts are not going to fit in the hole of the new wheels. So before I even dive into the lift kit, I got online and then ordered up some new lug nuts. These are 14mm lug nuts. I'm not a big fan of the spline drive lug nuts that you find a lot of places. That means you need that little key. That's the key that gets lost, and then you have a hard time removing the tires if you ever have a flat tire out on the trail. So I just ordered some online. They are 14mm, they have a 3/4 inch drive. You can use a normal 3/4 inch socket. So hopefully they are here by the end of the video, or I'm gonna have a lifted Jeep on little tiny tires. Aha, we are getting ready to do a suspension on a Jeep again. This is very, very similar to what we did on NoobSock, my JL. However, this is a Fabtech lift. And this is a 3-inch lift. It's their trail kit. So it'll have a taller coil, it'll have different shocks, it'll have different sway bar links. It'll also have different lower links on the front and rear. They're beefier, they're adjustable, so it helps you kind of set drive shaft angles as well as caster. The Fabtech kit also does a thing with the drag link where they put it above the knuckle, but I also have a kit from SteerSmart, which is another company that is supporting the giveaway Gladiator, and they have a drag link, a tie rod, and an adjustable track bar. So I'm probably gonna go with the SteerSmart stuff. I'm trying to use as many different companies as I can on this build. This is all stuff that the Cal 4 Wheel guys have sourced. So hopefully it'll all work out together. Lots of times it does, sometimes things don't. But I've talked to both companies and it sounds like it should go together pretty smoothly. So first things first, I'm gonna get my transmission jack and I'm gonna slide that underneath the axle so I can support the axle. If you're doing all of this on the ground, you're gonna wanna have jack stands under the frame to support the frame, and then smaller jack stands and a floor jack to move the axle to get things like the shocks and the coils and the sway bar links out. But because I'm doing it up here at this height, I'm gonna use my transmission jack, and I have that bracket that I built that kind of supports the thing. So let's get that under there. All right, let's see here. We disconnected the brake lines, took out the shocks, disconnected the track bar, marked all the bolts. All right, let's tell everybody. Okay, we disconnected the brake lines off the frame. We disconnected the top and bottom of the shock. We supported the axle with the transmission jack stand. We pulled out the front track bar, and we also did the sway bar links. Basically, all the things holding it together now, it should droop out so that the coils can fall out. So we lower down the jack stand nice and gently, and just like that, we can remove the coils. Yay. Don't forget, when you are removing the bolts, a lot of them look the same, but you want to keep them all. Don't be scared to grab a Sharpie, write on the bolt or the nut exactly what it comes from, or mark them somehow with a piece of tape so that you can put everything back where it goes. Another thing that's super helpful is to take your phone and take pictures of stuff like this rubber gasket dingus thing that goes underneath the coil, or this one that goes on top, or the routing of the brake lines, or where things plug in. Take a bunch of pictures before you take it all apart, and get good shots from different angles. Then you can always zoom in and be like, oh, that bracket goes there, or oh, that's the bolt that goes there. Moving right along. I have removed the shocks on the front, the coil springs on the front, and the factory sway bar links that run from this sway bar down to the axle housing. In addition, I have also removed the tie rod, which runs from knuckle to knuckle, as well as the steering stabilizer. I've removed the drag link, which runs from the passenger side knuckle up to the pitman arm on the steering box, and I removed the track bar, which runs from this location on the axle housing up to the chassis. The only thing that I did not remove, that I will have to remove eventually, is the lower links. But I'm going to leave those on for now because I'm going to start reassembling things, and I'll probably replace those one at a time so the axle housing doesn't flip and flop off of the jack stands. Now, if you recall from when I did the noob sock build, this is your upper link, back here is your lower link, and those are designed to keep the axle housing from twisting. That sets your caster, and it keeps it from flopping all over the place when you're going up and down. The track bar keeps the axle housing centered, so as it moves up and down, it kind of moves in a really slight arc, but it doesn't let it flop all over the place side to side. So let's go look at our new parts. These are the new parts. You have a 3-inch lift coil spring, and remember, on the Gladiators and the new JL Wranglers, the springs are specific to each corner. So you're going to want to look at the instructions and make sure that the part number matches the corner that it's supposed to go into. These are the new lower link arms, much beefier than the ones that are on there. They have kind of a rebuildable joint in this end, and then they will have a bushing style joint on the chassis end. These are the slightly longer sway bar links. They're also brand new Dirt Logic shocks, and they are bump stop spacers. These will go inside the coils so that at full compression everything doesn't crash together. In addition, there is a brand new steering stabilizer, which is the same kind of technology as the Dirt Logic shocks. So this all needs to be assembled and start to put on the Jeep. In addition to the coils and shocks and things, there's also some upgraded steering parts. This is from SteerSmart. It's a beefier, heavy-duty tie rod, a replacement drag link, as well as a much beefier, heavy-duty adjustable track bar that will replace the factory components. Now, SteerSmart might not be a company you've heard of before, but they've actually been around a long time making OEM components that have been installed on vehicles right on the assembly line. And then they eventually came up with their own line of kind of heavy-duty components. So the Fabtech kit does have some of the similar pieces, but because SteerSmart is stepping in to supply some of the stuff, we're going to try and use all of the SteerSmart things, as far as drag link, tie rod, and track bar, and then we will make it work with the Fabtech suspension. I've drilled out the spring perch where the coil spring goes, because this is the bump stop extension. It's basically a big chunk of aluminum with a hole in the middle, and that is going to sit right on there and be bolted, have a bolt run through it to bolt it to the spring perch. Now, in order to install this, I need to put the coil spring in first. This is my new 3-inch lift coil spring. So this wants to slide up on here, and then it has to get up over that spring perch while holding the bump stop inside here so that everything compresses, and then I can bolt it in once it's in place. Now, I've figured out on the other side that wrestling the coil with the bump stop in it is kind of a pain in the neck. So that's my solution. I basically zip tie the bump stop spacer into the coil. Because the top protrudes down so far, you're gonna definitely slide the top in first, and then you're gotta try and get the bottom of the coil up over this rubber mount and onto the spring perch. Now, I have a ratchet strap on the other side trying to kind of pull the other side of the axle up so that the driver's side droops out and I can put the coil in. That worked great for that side but now I have a coil in there, so I'm trying to compress that coil and get this all to droop out. The instructions say I may need to remove the front drive shaft for this step. I really hope I don't have to. I've already got the lower links in. I don't have the track bar in because I find that having the track bar out allows you to move the front end around a lot better. So let's get this guy up on here and see. All right, it looks like it really needs to just go up. Oh boy, that's probably gonna do it. All right, coil is on. So that's a win. I didn't lose any fingers. However, the coil needs to rotate around so it is seated in the spring perch just right. And I think if we turn it this way, oh, come on, you kind of got to twist it. Oh, you know what? I've got the perfect solution for this. WD-40. This stuff, my dad as a kid would basically tell us anytime we worked on anything, spray it down with WD-40 first. It could have been made out of wood and he still would have said, spray it down with WD-40 first. Because it makes stuff lubricated and helps it to move. Come on, you. Oh, I should probably put some on the top too, because it's probably binding up there as well. All right. Twist you. There it goes. The problem is now there's WD-40 on it where I need to grab it. Come on, you bugger. Turn. There. There. Aha! Dad was right. He always was, even when he sounded crazy. And just like that, now our bump stop is seated right down in there. We're gonna find a hardware. We're gonna find some hardware. Basically a bolt that drops down through the bump stop, and then there's a flag nut that comes up through the bottom, holds all that in place, and then, I don't know, move on to the next step, I guess. The spring is in, the bump stop is in. The next step, there are these brackets that are designed to go right down here on the bottom of the shock mount. For some reason, the Fabtech kit moves the bottom of the shock out. So instead of being in the shock mount like it would be, it's moved outside of that. So it'll sit like this. Now, which is probably done so that under articulation, if the shock swings in, it doesn't hit the frame, or basically just for clearance of everything. This kit is pretty neat. It's designed to bolt on right here, and then you'll put a spacer, a long bolt that goes through both mounts. The problem with this is that they want you to drill a 3/8 hole into this spring perch, and then also into the bracket that holds the brake line. And my drill does not fit into there. And I don't have like a little teeny tiny 3/8 drill bit. So I did what I thought was, let me just explain. There's a there's a thin line between lazy and efficient. So I might have been being lazy, but I might also been efficient, where I drilled out the bracket instead. And I'm gonna reuse this little tiny 10mm bolt, but the washer is big and now it sits inside that bracket. Now the cool thing about all of this is you don't have to drill out these parts that are on the Jeep. You drill out the part that you're installing, and that can then just be easily held in the vise when you want to drill it. So that goes right in there. Get that bolt started. So that bolt gets started, and you can just see it there. That's going to align everything. It may not be the part that's actually supporting the shock, but it will align everything. Then there's also this long bolt, and this is what runs through everything. And then through another bracket here. Actually, it goes this way. That goes through a little spacer, and then through another spacer, and then goes to the inside there. And then there's a little tiny bolt that comes up through the bottom. Now, when the shock goes in, this long bolt will run through that shock and then through this second spacer and into the inner shock bolt or shock mount. And then that'll all be in basically triple shear. There'll be this tab, this tab, this tab, and it'll suspend everything just fine. So it's bolted into the bottom. It's lined with that little bolt, that factory bolt that holds the brake line. Everything is in place. You don't have to drill any of the axle housing or the brake mount because it's all factory. I think this is a better system. I'm sure Fabtech would have preferred me to fight and try to get a 3/8 drill bit inside all this, but I think that this will work just fine. If you really are nervous about it, you can come in here and put a little weld tack on there, but I don't think that's going anywhere. Fabtech supplied some Dirt Logic shocks. These have a remote reservoir. They do have a spacer that will go in the shock mount to kind of hold the body of the shock away from the chassis. Also, it uses that lower bracket that I told you about that pushes the bottom of the shock away from the chassis so that under articulation it doesn't want to swing into the frame. You do need to cut and grind not only the plastic section but also the metal at the bottom of the shock mount to clear the aluminum cap on the shock. Then we're just going to feed this up in here. It might take a little bit of convincing because you have the bushings and this metal sleeve that all need to fit up inside there, and then you'll slide the bolt in. Let me set the bolt right here. Try to see if I can get this to feed up in there. Come on. Come on, you. There we go. The coils are in, the bump stop extensions are in, the shocks are in, the lower links are in. Time to move on to the track bar and the steering. Now the track bar has a few different options if you're doing the Fabtech kit or if you're doing the Steer Smart parts or if you're doing a mixture of the two. The Fabtech kit comes with a bracket like this that goes onto the track bar mount, and it raises the track bar this high. And then it also has you drill out the knuckle and move the drag link to the top of the knuckle. The reason is when you're building a suspension with a drag link and a track bar, you want them to be as close to the same angle and the same length as possible. in a perfect world, they would be like identical in angle, length, and location, so that as the axle moves up and down and the track bar pivots up and down, the drag link pivots in the same arc and you don't get bump steer. Now, Fabtech has this idea that if you bring the drag link up and you also bring the track bar up, that it helps keep the track bar flatter, and it also has less of an angle on both the track bar and the drag link, which is also good. You want that to be as flat as possible. SteerSmart offers a kit to do the same thing, or they offer an adjustable track bar. So even though the angle is a little bit steeper, you can adjust it to keep everything in centered. I guess keep that front axle centered. So I have decided, after looking at both of it, rather than drill out this aluminum knuckle and change it to the top side, I'm going to use the SteerSmart stuff with the adjustable track bar. There's also a bracket for that, which goes right here on the track bar mount, and it has these two tabs for the Fabtech steering stabilizer. So even though you can drill this out and put it up on top, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do the one that kind of keeps it standard. Now, Fabtech does offer a taller lift than 3 inches. They offer a 5-inch lift. With that much lift, I think it would probably be a good idea to go with the raised track bar and to go with the high steer. But for this one, I'm going to just go with kind of standard, and we'll see how it goes. We have all the parts if we want to change it down the road later, but I have a feeling it's, with only 3 inches of lift, I'm hoping that everything will be pretty kosher at the current setup. So next step, we're going to bring the SteerSmart adjustable track bar in, mount that up, put this bracket in. You will need to drill one hole for this, or you could put the taller bracket on now and just have it on for later if you ever want to switch it up. I think for now we're just going to go with all the SteerSmart stuff. And then, yeah, track bar, drag link, tie rod, sway bar links, and the front of this, oh, and steering stabilizer. The front of this should be done. Let's get to work. This red and black bar is your adjustable track bar that comes from SteerSmart. This section in the middle is threaded on the inside, and as you turn it, the track bar will get longer or shorter. I'm going to just leave it at the current setup and lengthen this until this bolt hole lines up. So let's just spin it out. You could also start with the length of the factory track bar and then adjust it accordingly once you have the weight on it, because basically what you want is when the thing is on at ride height, the axle is centered in between on both sides. So that looks about good right there. And then this is that bracket that will mount right here, and then the steering stabilizer will go in this part. And then you'll want to come in here and drill a little hole and bolt that in so that it's kind of double bolted. Let's find some hardware. There's that flag nut I had before with the track bar note on the flag nut. This is going to go through here, into there. I think we might throw a dab of Loctite on there. There we go. Now I got to drill a hole right there. Sway bar links are on. Now I'm going to put the tie rod on. This thing is definitely beefier and heavier than the factory one. We're going to put a washer and the nut on there. I just set this to the same length as the factory tie rod. you'll come back in and adjust it afterwards, set your toe, and then lock it all into place. There we go. Next, I'm going to mock up the steering stabilizer. You're going to have these, there's going to be a spacer on the top and bottom. So we'll get those in. And then all of this will slide into this bracket. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Front suspension's coming together. Most of the Fabtech stuff is done. I went on to the Steer Smart. Drag link is in, tie rod is in, track bar is in, but all three of those are adjustable. So now I need to sort out the lengths of each so that the axle sits center, so that the tires have a little bit of toe in, and so that the steering wheel is straight and when the wheels are pointed straight. So to do that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it down and put it on jack stands. And when it's on jack stands, I will measure from the knuckle or the outer C to the frame, making sure that the axle is centered underneath the frame at ride height. Once that's centered, then I can put some front tires on and make sure that they have the proper toe in. I usually go for about 1/8 of an inch of toe in, and then I can adjust the tie rod accordingly. Once that's set, then I can also make sure that the steering wheel is straight when the tires are straight. And that might be required to do after I get the rear suspension done so that I can drive it front and back, make sure it all stays straight. And if the steering wheel is off a little, I may have to adjust the length of the drag link a little bit. And then finally, the Dirt Logic steering stabilizer, that needs to be bolted on. And to do that, I will make sure that the tie rod moves as far as it should in either direction, and then I'll figure out the sweet spot for that, bolt that on, and then that will be done. All right, then we'll move to the rear. I lowered the Jeep down onto the transmission jack, which basically raised the front of the Jeep just slightly off the arms of the lift. So basically what I did was I put weight on the front suspension, which should tell us that this is about ride height, which is a lot. There's a lot of up travel here. In order to get our track bar set, we want to have this at ride height and then figure out if the axle, say this is your axle, and you want this to be centered underneath the frame. So I took a straight edge down from the frame rail and I measured in from the top of the ball joint on the knuckle, and I got a measurement. And I determined that the axle is just slightly towards the driver's side, which would make sense because when I made the track bar, this is our track bar, I set it to the same length as factory. So as the vehicle raises, this is attached to the frame, so it's going up, the axle is getting pushed towards the driver's side because it's basically coming in at an angle. Now, in order to fix this, you need to make this track bar longer, which will then push this back over, even though it'll stay at that angle. I wish my arm was extendable like a plastic man, because then I could show it even better. But basically, I put a few turns on the track bar and pushed the axle closer towards the passenger side, remeasured everything. It should be centered right now, and now I can tighten up the brackets on the track bar, and then we'll actually bring it to the ground and put tires on it and measure for our toe, which is the next step. When you're tightening these clamps, you want to think about where they will be in relation to everything else that's moving up and down. You don't want them to smash into the top of the axle housing. You don't want them to smash into the steering stabilizer. And those things can like move in and out a little bit as things twist and steer. So you just kind of want to make a conscious effort to kind of keep everything clear of things that it could crash into. And then you might also find that you actually have to steer the axle so you can get the impact in there to tighten it all up. We're gonna go here and we're gonna do the box end. Remember how I said earlier that my dad would always say put WD-40 on bolts you want to take apart? The other rule he had was always put anti-seize on the threads of an axle before you put, like on your wheel studs, before you put a wheel on it. I don't really know if there's a engineering premise behind that or that was just an old farmer's rule, but I still do it. I still get anti-seize on everything else too. We finally are getting to the stage of the build where we get to put new tires on, which is probably the best part because it makes whatever you're building look really cool. Put big tires on it. I gotta say, I appreciate all the different automotive hobbies, whether you're a hot rodder, low rider, import guy, whatever. But nothing makes vehicles look cooler than big tires. Like that's the coolest part, is putting bigger tires on stuff. Here's that box of new lug nuts that I ordered. Nothing fancy. I went with black because I thought they would look better with the bronze wheels. Oh, when you are swapping wheels and tires, don't forget to get your tire pressure sensor monitor, TPMS thingies put in. And also, even if you use an impact to put the lug nuts on, go back in with a torque wrench and torque them. You don't want your wheels to fall off. Especially if you just got cool new bronze wheels. This thing is cool looking. I picked a lug on the tire, which was actually this one, this little triangular one. And then I matched it on the exact same lug on the other tire, and I measured that distance. And then I went to the back of the tire, and I measured at those same lugs at the same distance. And it turned out the front axle was towed in a bit. So I adjusted the tie rod, made it a little bit longer, and then it was too wide, towed out. So then I brought it back in, and what I like is somewhere around 1/8 of an inch to 3/16 of an inch of toe in. That means that the front tires are a little bit narrower than the back of the tires. I think that drives well. And everybody's different. Everybody has different frames, rules, especially with different vehicles and different suspensions. You might want to tweak this down the road, but that's what I went with. I ended up with just about 3/16 of an inch toe in. Might be a little bit excessive, but we will drive it and see how it does. Once I got this set, then I went in and I tightened down the clamps on the Steer Smart tie rod, so everything's pretty tight. Also made sure all the tie rod ends are tight and torqued to spec. There's little tags that come on each tie rod end, which tells you how much to torque them to. So what's left on the front is to make sure that when the steering is pointed straight, so like turn the wheel all the way this, turn the wheel all the way that, does it look like it's straight? Then we tighten down the drag link, and that should have our steering wheel straight. Some of these newer Jeeps get really kind of wonky if your steering wheel's twisted and you're driving down the road. ABS lights and things get pissed off. So we're going to make sure that that is as centered as possible. And all of this, you might want to send this Jeep to a garage with lasers and all that stuff to do a full alignment. after the fact, but I think this will be perfect for now to get it done because we still have to do the back of this Jeep, which should be a lot easier because there's no steering bars to deal with. It's just the links and the track bar. I put the Jeep on the floor and the steering wheel was not level. It was kind of twisted. So I lengthened the drag link until the steering wheel was level, and then I tightened all the clamps down on that. Now on the drag link and the tie rod, there's basically a tube and it has like a slot cut in it, and when you tighten up those clamps, it clamps it. I try to set it so those slots that are cut in the tube are up and down rather than level, horizontal. That way, if it gets water in it, it'll drain back out. It's just a little thing that I like to do. Then I tightened up the steering stabilizer. I turned it all the way one direction, I turned it all the way the other direction, and I set it so that when it is I set it backwards. I just realized I set it backwards. I set it with the steering stabilizer all the way out when it's turned this way. What it needs to be is the other direction. So now I need to loosen it, turn the whole thing the other direction, and then it should be right. Nope. All right. So when the steering is turned all the way to the passenger, the steering stabilizer is collapsed with just a little bit of left of shaft showing. When it goes all the way driver, it is perfect. So all we have to do is tighten down 2 bolts. One is we just have to tighten down the bolts on the steering stabilizer. And then I think we are ready to pull the Jeep out and flip it around. I was gonna do the rear lift in the back corner, but it's easier for me to just put the tires on it, drive the thing out, Carolina squat style with the front big and the rear little, and then we'll turn it around. Did you guys hear that they canceled or made it illegal to have Carolina squat? Which, I mean, I guess you were driving around with your headlights pointed up, but you could have adjusted those down. But I don't understand why it's illegal. It seems kind of silly to make that illegal. If anything, it's easier to put things in the bed of your truck when it's Carolina squatted. Unless it's really a safety thing and people can't see. I don't know. People like to make rules. The Gladiator is up on the lift and I'm pulling apart the rear suspension. I just got word that the guys are gonna come pick up the Gladiator tomorrow, which is great because they will take it to some shows and sell more raffle tickets, because the whole point of this, again, is to raffle this thing off, raise money for Cal 4-Wheel, and one of you will win it. I'm not sure which show it's going to next, but they are going to take it to a bunch of Cal 4-Wheel events. So if you are in California and you want to check it out, be sure and get on their calendar and see where they will be. The rear suspension shouldn't go too hard because there's no steering to deal with. So it's just going to be, I think, lower links, coils, shocks, bump stop extensions, sway bar link, longer sway bar links, and I think an adjustable track bar. Let's get this thing done. Shock out. Note that these coils have a rubber isolator on the top. It also has these kind of rubber things that go around the coil. And I've been putting those on the new coils so that they are in place. This thing locates at the top with that little nipple, which goes into a hole up in the bottom of the frame. So we're going to set this aside until we get the new coils. So at this point, the old coils are out, sway bar links are off, track bar bolt is removed. Lower link bolts have been loosened and the nuts taken off, but the bolts aren't removed because those are going to be replaced. Shocks are out, coils are out. So now is where we start putting things back together. On the rear, we add some bump stop spacers. In the front, they go inside the coil. On the rear, there's a pad right here on the outside of the coil. And the Fabtech kit comes with this extension that literally just bolts right on there. There's already holes in the old bump stop. So we're gonna grab some bolts and we will run these bolts up through the bottom of the old bump stop plate and then bolt them into place. I was thinking about this whole Jeep, putting this suspension on, and it's really not that difficult. I think this is one of the things that makes Jeeps so desirable by a lot of people, is that you can modify them without needing a lot of really technical tools. Now, don't get me wrong, having a lift, having an air compressor, having power tools, all of that stuff makes it go much quicker and makes it much easier. But you could put this lift kit on with floor jacks and jack stands and hand tools. Probably want a torque wrench. Probably need a breaker bar because some of these bolts that go through like the links are really torqued really high. So having like some long breaker bars to break it loose. But, and I mean, having a lift definitely makes it nicer. I don't know that it's mandatory, but it definitely makes it nicer compared to trying to do this all on the ground on a gravel driveway, but it's all possible. There's always talk that maybe Jeep someday won't have solid axles, or at least not have a solid front axle. And I think that would be such a bummer because I feel like the solid axle type suspension is just that much easier to install. Bump stop spacers are on each side. Now we'll replace the lower links. Bang! That drops down. This bolt slides out. These things are pretty lightweight. They would be great like if you were gonna build a little Jeep, a little flat fender, CJ5 or something, or a street Jeep that you didn't really plan on smashing this into a lot of boulders. But I think for the Gladiator, the new links will be much beefier. So on the front, this kind of rebuildable joint was at the axle. On the rear, they want this joint, the bushing joint, to be at the axle. It does have a Zerk fitting which hangs down, but they put two little like guards on either side to kind of protect it. And we'll just feed that guy right in there. Reuse the factory hardware. Now, at this end, I'm gonna need a little mallet. Come here, hammer. Grab your little rubber hammer. I don't know if you can see right there. We are off by about a ½ inch. So, I've already set these to the length that they talk about, so I need to pull the whole axle backwards. What I'm gonna do, I'll throw a ratchet strap around the axle housing here. And then I'm gonna run this end back here to the rear trailer hitch. And then we will put a little bit of pressure on this, jack it backwards. Look at that. Bolt holes just about perfectly lined up. Boom. It's really close. I think if we put this on here, right down, and the bolt goes right in. Remember where I said they are coming tomorrow to pick up the Gladiator? Well, that's when I figured out that what I have is not the adjustable rear track bar for a Gladiator, but the adjustable rear track bar for a JL, or the Wrangler version, not the pickup truck, which is the JT. So now I have to make a decision before they show up tomorrow. It's not a problem. I can get the proper one from SteerSmart. In fact, they'll send it to me overnight, but I won't have it here in time before the Jeep gets picked up tomorrow. The Fabtech kit uses a bracket that they basically modify the axle bracket for the track bar, and they put this on, which raises the track bar. Not a bad idea, not a bad design. And then you can actually reuse the factory track bar. So I have to either put this on and use the factory track bar until the adjustable track bar shows up, or I can try and put the SteerSmart's JL track bar on, but this thing is like 2 inches at least longer than the factory one, and that'll probably push the axle over towards the driver's side and have the tire sticking out farther on the driver's side. Not ideal. Fortunately, the Jeep is not really going wheeling right away. It's just going to a bunch of shows, and it'll be back here, and I can finish the build with the proper parts. So I think what I'm going to do is try and put this bracket on the axle, and probably just use the factory track bar for now. And if everything lines up, it'll be fine. And if not, when the SteerSmart's JT adjustable track bar shows up, I can put that in and fine tune the rear suspension. So 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and it always shows up on the last step the night before the Jeep has to leave. So don't feel like it's any different for me than it is for you, because I know how it is. These things go sideways all the time. So we're going to do a little cutting on here to get this bracket to fit on the axle. And this guy. And this is going to go right in. Come on. There. All right, we have a fix. This bracket used to be taller because it was kind of tied from both sides. I cut that off. This is the Fabtech track bar relocation bracket. And what it does is it basically moves the track bar bolt from there up to there. And when you raise that, it helps with the suspension, and it also helps so you don't need an adjustable track bar. Which, even though I say that, when we get the adjustable track bar later on, we'll probably put it in because you can kind of fine tune everything a little bit with it. So this slides into the old bracket, and then there's a spacer that goes inside there, and this 9/16 bolt runs through all of this, and then there will be smaller 7/16 bolts. You have to drill a couple holes in here, and these will go through those holes and into the bracket to kind of help hold everything. So even though I don't have the bracket that I was, or the proper adjustable track bar that I was hoping to have, I still have these parts, so I can still make it all work. you know, we'll persevere. Even when stuff goes wrong, like there's always a solution. Sometimes you get frustrated because you're like, I thought I was gonna be done. Well, guess what? You're not gonna be done. You're gonna be done later, but it'll all work out. I think when I did this on my noob sock, my 2-door JL, I actually welded this, which added more strength to it, more rigidity. But I mean, there's a lot of these 3 bolts are 7/16, this is 9/16. It's probably not gonna go anywhere, but you could come in here, grind all the powder coat and paint off and burn it in a few places, and it would just make it that much stronger. All right, next step. I hung the shock here on the driver's side, but I wanna get the coil in first because you might need to pull the axle down. The brake line has been loosened up so that it can flex a little bit. But the next step is to wrestle the new taller coils in there. These, I believe, are progressive rate coils. You can see how they're tighter at the top than at the bottom. I put those kind of coil isolators on that were on the factory coils, and I put the mount at the top. So I think it's time to see if we can feed this up in here. There we go. Oh yeah, this is really pretty close. All right. It needs to go up and in a little bit. So I think I'm gonna grab a pry bar. I basically have to compress the spring enough to get over this hump, and then it'll be in line. So I'm gonna put this pry bar in here. Oh yeah. Look at that. Boom, that one's in place. Let me just do the same on the other side, and we're getting close. It's coming together. I found that to make it easier to get the coils in, it helps to loosen up the bolts on the upper links. I've already loosened the bottom ones, but the upper ones were still tight, and just being tight, they limit some of the travel. So you want to get those loose so you can droop the axle out all the way before you get the coils in perfectly. So really all that's left is to put the shocks on, and the axle is drooped out to a length now that I'm going to have to jack it up a little bit to get the lower bolts in. And then we'll do sway bars, track bar, and deal with the brake lines, because the brake lines are just about at their full limit when the shocks are fully drooped out. Put these coil kind of wrap guards on the new coils from the factory coils, but they are kind of falling off. They seem to not be, on the factory coils, they seem to have been glued on, so that's probably part of that situation. But I think everything's coming together now. With the raised track bar mount, the track bar just about bolts in. And we're gonna get these shocks mounted. They actually have to come down a little bit. There we go. I think we have a shock bolt over here. Don't leave your flashlight in your pocket. It gets really hot. I added the longer sway bar links, bolted in the track bar bracket. The shock reservoir are mounted in a location. All the bolts are tight. I went and double checked everything. So all that's left is to bolt on the last tire and get this thing on the ground. This does use the factory track bar, which I think will be fine for now. It may be off center just a little bit, but once we get the proper Steer Smart track bar, we can put that in there and fine tune it if it's not centered. I do want to drop the old spare tire and try to put the 37 up in here. Did a little bit of research on that, and some people say it'll fit, some people say you have to deflate it, some people say that you have to remove this heat shield. I'm going to drop this one and see if I can make it fit and then roll this thing out of here, because they're coming tomorrow to take this thing away. And don't you forget to go to the Cal 4-Wheel website and buy your raffle tickets. One of you is going to be driving this Jeep next year. I can't wait to see it on the trail. That's it for this Dirt Daily. We'll see you guys next time. I got the spare tire up in there. It fit perfect. I did remove the heat shield, but there's still plenty of space between the exhaust and the tire, so I don't really think it's going to be a concern. That's pretty cool. Stuff a 37 up in your spare tire spot, and this thing is ready to go.